Have you ever wondered why Mike Toreno decided to establish the San Fierro criminal group known as the Loco Syndicate since he was a CIA agent? Why did a government agent risk his job? After all, if all this came to light, Mike Toreno would be finished. Was it about money? Assuming that was the case, why wasn't he mad at CJ when he ruined his successful business? And so, if Mike forgave CJ and told him to do some dirty work, why didn't these tasks fill Toreno's pockets with dollars as compensation, but only contribute to resolving various political skirmishes? At first glance, this doesn't make much sense. Moreover, the developers did not fully explain it to the players. The answer was not handed to us on a platter. To comprehensively examine the topic and understand why Mike Toreno ruled the Loco Syndicate, we must go far beyond the game itself. To explain everything quickly and not get lost in unimportant details, we need to dig a bit on the internet. To be precise, find a historical outline and some basic information about a certain organization, namely the Contra organization. The Contras organization was a right-wing group of rebels who fought against the communist government elected after the end of the first phase of the war in Nicaragua in 1979. In short, then US President Ronald Reagan believed that such a group could effectively stop the expansion of communist influence in the local region. After all, the Cold War was going on, and the President of the United States wanted to show his strength and consequently gain in the polls. What is very important for the whole story is that the Contra organization was strongly supported by the United States. This support, providing important information, communication, and many similar elements, all this was kept secret so that the matter would not suddenly become loud in the mass media. However, due to not taking enough precautions, the whole thing went awry in the end. As a result, the United States Congress passed a ban on providing support to the Contra group. But the decision of Congress did not stop Reagan from secretly continuing illegal activities on behalf of the Contra organization. The CIA government unit became delegated to supervise all matters in this regard. One of the first tasks of this agency was to conduct training programs for recruits and even entire units, while the American government itself provided support to the Contras, which in turn took place on several different levels. One of the most important things was supplying people with the necessary weapons. After all, what good is it that recruits are well trained if they don't have the appropriate weaponry that they could use as part of their excellent training? Due to this type of assistance, the United States began to see more heavy traffic of freight trains loaded with firearms of all types. The trains headed towards port cities, where the equipment was unloaded and then transferred to containers that were moved to ships bound for Central America, where, of course, Nicaragua is located. In turn, the government had to get more funds to finance all the war activities that took place in that country. Since the operation was illegal and, as mentioned earlier, Congress banned it, it was not possible to take money from the state depository. The money had to be found elsewhere. Then, a concept was invented to obtain the necessary funds in a very simple and effective way: drug trafficking, a product that will probably always guarantee big demand. The entire operation was planned in such a way that the CIA did not have to be directly involved in these projects, but only acted as an intermediary between the drug cartels and the American government. The CIA, of course, could not afford for criminal organizations to find out who they were dealing with, so the identities of the representatives were concealed, and the representatives themselves usually pretended to be some extremely wealthy businessmen. Therefore, within a few weeks, a long-lasting drug smuggling operation from Panama to California was launched. Doesn't this remind you of something? Doesn't this remind you of Mike Toreno's concealed identity? Doesn't this remind you of how Mike Toreno had the drugs smuggled to the United States and then, using the help of members of the Loco Syndicate, transported them to Los Santos to Big Smoke, who made a fortune from it? If you don't remember, let's recall the following cutscene from the introduction.
Now listen, that was a buyer. We gotta step up production. We're not thinking big enough here, okay? My connections in Panama can get us all the product we need, untouched. But you gotta arrange the market.
Of course, both sides played unfairly during the Cold War. Unfortunately, it was often the innocent people who suffered as a result. Apart from, needless to say, the immoral aspect of raising money by selling drugs for other immoral things, that is warfare, unfortunately, the activities of the Contra organization were also associated with other horrible things. There have been a lot of controversial topics surrounding the activities of this group related to the widespread violation of human rights. It turns out that the Contras didn't just act as an ordinary group of rebels. The group's activities also included activities typical of terrorist groups. Many brutal acts against civilians occurred during the clashes, such as public executions, arson, sexual violence, and kidnappings. The rebels did not even show mercy towards children because, as we can read in various sources, their targets were often schools or hospitals. It's sometimes hard to believe what we can read about this guerrilla group in Newsweek, where, for example, we find a testimony made by one of the students who traveled with one of the Contra units. Now that we know quite a lot about the Contra's organization, we know the historical background, and we're simply aware of what it looked like in real life. Let's take a look at how the creators presented this group in the game. The first thread related to the Contras is the activities of Tenpenny and the entire Crash unit in the context of cooperation with gangs operating in the Los Santos area, and in the context of making them constantly fight each other. It's important to notice that during the Catalyst mission, Tenpenny mentioned to all the gangs that a train carrying quite an arsenal would soon stop on the border of Jefferson and East Los Santos. At first, it seemed like Tenpenny was just tipping off the Grove Street families, but it later became clear that it wasn't the case. The Grove Street families, the Ballas, and the Vagos all got the destination. Only Barrio Las Aztecas did not take part in this, but it's easy to guess why. The Aztecas were rather in a secondary group. They wouldn't pose a huge threat. It is not difficult to connect the dots here and see a reference to real-world events, specifically to the intense traffic of cargo trains loaded with combat equipment heading towards the ports. The only thing that's a bit unclear in all this is why Tenpenny was making everything difficult for the CIA, since that agency was, in a sense, a sort of superior to him and the other officers. Tenpenny eventually caused the weapons shipment to be intercepted, resulting in the Contras not receiving the equipment they needed to carry out their guerrilla operations. The answer to this question is as follows. Tenpenny simply wanted to maintain the balance between the gangs in the city. Although during the game, it's visible that Officer Tenpenny favors the Ballas much more often, the man still does not want them to become too strong. This would then be problematic for him. In such a case, the Crash unit could lose control over such a gang. After all, if the Ballas grew up too much and felt very self-confident, who knows whether they would stand up to Tenpenny, who would then be forced to abandon his plan, which was to earn a huge fortune. This is why Crash, with Tenpenny at the top, deliberately passed on valuable information to the gangs. As a result, this led to constant gang wars, which in turn prevented one of the groups from achieving full dominance. On the other hand, the second reference to the Contras organization is the activities of Mike Toreno. More precisely, it's primarily about the creation of the Loco Syndicate. The CIA, for which Mike worked, created cooperation between street gangs and foreign investors who were actually undercover government agents. The ultimate goal of the syndicates was to produce drugs, not import them. Since the CIA could not afford to smuggle drugs due to the risks associated with smuggling itself, then the organizations reached agreements with other local gangs, which played the role of a distributor in this whole business. However, before the syndicates started creating drugs themselves, the CIA was earning a lot of money by being an important intermediary, often even a key one, due to its contacts in the drug world. And this is an example directly referring to Mike Toreno's conversation with T-Bone Mendez. By the way, the developers showed us a perfect reference to drug smuggling to California in GTA San Andreas. We know this because there are indications that the organization was involved in smuggling drugs into Los Angeles. Returning to the cutscene of Toreno's conversation with Mendez, Toreno mentions that his connections will allow him to obtain any amount of drugs from Panama, a country also located in South America. Incidentally, a country located very close to Nicaragua. Shortly afterward, we learn what these connections probably stem from, which happens in the hijack mission, during which Toreno mentions to CJ that he was involved in activities in Latin America.
Yes, when we last met, I was involved in battling threats in Latin America by any means necessary. That does not make me a drug dealer.
Now, let's look at drug smuggling itself. It is worth mentioning this because in GTA San Andreas, we can find a total of 3 related missions for Mike Toreno. The first of them is the Monster mission, which was drastically changed in the final version. Looking at the script for this mission in the beta version, it looks like the developers were very inspired by one of Rockstar's previous games, namely Smuggler's Run. Similarly to the previously mentioned game, in the Monster mission, the player's task was originally to get drug packages before other criminal organizations collected them. Depending on how many packages we manage to obtain, Toreno will want to continue working with us or not. There was also a phone call from Mike during the mission. However, it's difficult to say why the original concept of this mission was scrapped because, in its initial concept, it fit perfectly. The next task where drugs appear is interdiction. This time, we have to protect a helicopter that is about to arrive with valuable cargo for Toreno's people. It is true that in the mission itself, it's not clearly stated what the package contains, but considering the connections with the Contra organization, we can be sure that they are drugs. Anyway, some other government agency found out about the planned drop and decided to try to thwart it. It can therefore be seen that good government agencies decided to further obstruct the illegal and extremely immoral activities of the CIA. The last quest worth discussing in this topic is the NOE mission. Similarly to the interdiction mission, here we deal with contraband, but this time the player must deliver it by plane. This mission is not very simple. We must constantly look at the flight altitude so that CJ remains out of radar range and is not detected. Toreno, on the other hand, cannot get involved because he is constantly under surveillance by other government agencies. Knowing the story of the Contra organization, we know why Mike had to delegate this task. If he had stepped out on his own, his agency could have been linked to the Contras, and therefore the actions of the President of the United States against the decision of Congress would have been revealed, and so it was all handled with the necessary discretion.
Guys watching me all the time. I got 2 in that hill, 1 over there, and 2 by satellite. If I go, my guys and I will be dead. I don't have a death wish. I'm a man of peace, son.
Yeah, clearly.
Finally, let's try to discuss why the CIA did not react to Tenpenny, who at times seriously disturbed the agency, wanting to implement his plan. It would seem that there's no rational reason, and perhaps, what's more, that might be the truth. Perhaps this is some developer oversight because they wanted to combine everything so that the story would stick together. But it didn't work out as it should in the end. If we want to explain it somewhat logically, the explanation is probably that these weapons were to be taken, but only by gangs that were not against crack. The gang led by Sweet, who had a negative attitude towards crack cocaine, was not supposed to know about this merchandise. So here we have a situation in which Tenpenny was supposed to help gangs that wanted crack all over the city, and take out those gangs that did not want crack so that even more drugs could reach the city. Drugs from which the CIA had money to finance the activities of the Contras. Tenpenny, however, secretly tipped off the Grove Street Boys to pursue his agenda. I'm counting on your help here because in the end, it's hard to determine the only good version of events. So as today's episode shows, the activities of the Contra organization were the key reason why Mike Toreno decided to create the Loco Syndicate. The CIA concluded that cooperation with criminals would be the best solution to obtain assets to support Contra's activities in Central America. It's an interesting way to look at Mike Toreno now. On the one hand, we see him as a kind of friend who tries to maintain peace in the world, using somewhat unconventional methods. On second thought, we see a criminal who protects and helps people responsible for committing many terrible acts. If you haven't seen the episode that discusses whether Mike Toreno worked with Tenpenny, check it out. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Take care and see you soon.